Uh, Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our UBLN Academy. This is next session in the course Recruitment and Deployment, and I'm very happy to welcome you today at the session that is called How to Chase Your Career. Today we have a star guest, a star speaker, John Jeffcock. He is the CEO of a world's leading C-suite business network, Winmark, and an author of The Sweet Spot.
Cool. Thank you, Anna, and great to be here with you today. So the background, so I wrote a book about how to get into the C-suite and be successful in it. So the book was really, there's lots of work done on bias and diversity, but really the aim of my book is I thought there were structural issues that are why people weren't getting into the C-suite. So the idea is to help them out on that journey, on their career. So this is what this is about. Do you mind if I share slides? Is that okay? Oh, can you enable me to be host, please, so I can share slides? Thank you.
Hold on. I'm trying.
Okay.
Yes, please, can you try this?
Okay, got it. Okay, so here we go. So hopefully you can see that. I'll get rid of this top bar. I'll get rid of the top bar. High floating controls. I'll take that to 1. Okay, cool. Full screen. So we're going to go. This is a bit of a. This is a course I teach on the Imperial MBA program at Imperial College and at the University of East London and at a few other places. So it's a good. And it's about to be on the Cambridge MBA program as well. So it's generally quite good from that. I'm not going to introduce myself. I guess the main point to say is this is based on 20+ years of experience of running C-suite networks and how people progress through their careers, and obviously the book and the research I've done to support that. So it's about mobility in C-suite. This is what the book looks like. It's a brilliant book. You're welcome to buy it, obviously, or get good feedback on it on Amazon. Really, it's about increasing social mobility into the C-suite, which in turn creates diversity, which in turn improves all the organizations that we serve. So that's what we're about today, and you're very welcome to ask questions as we go through. I'm coming at this from a large organization perspective, so this doesn't really work in an SME. If you employ 20 people, this doesn't really work. But if you employ 1,000 people plus, this is where this really works. So it's a large organization approach to careers. So can I start by asking you to guess how many? Do you want to put into how many people do you think are in the executive committee? How do you think? How many people? I guess. How many people do you think are in the executive committee? As a guess, any guesses on that? I guess
10, 11, 12,
yeah,
up to 15. I'd say. I'd say from 8 till 15.
Okay. And which roles do you think are the most common?
CFO, marketing,
yeah,
HR for sure. HR.
yeah.
Legal, but again depends. Maybe like a secretary, or this commercial.
Okay, it's interesting that
Logistics.
So in terms of it's quite interesting on gender diversity as well, on where are most women in terms of roles. And do you want to have a guess on who leads, who's better, Asia, USA, or Europe in terms of more women in executive committees? Who do you think is better, Asia, US, or Europe? Any guesses?
I guess Europe.
Yeah, and you're correct. Spot on. And can you guess which roles have most women? Can you guess which roles have most women?
Marketing, commercial. No, marketing for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and the answer is HR. HR has most women. So if we look at the stats, and when I look at the stats here, I'm afraid I haven't got stats for South America or Africa. So these stats are based on Europe, North America, and Asia. And they're based on public companies. These are traded companies on stock exchanges. So the European data is based on all of the stock exchanges across Europe and all the companies that sit on those on those organizations. So it's a lot of data. So going to this are thousands of companies. So what is interesting on gender, you'll see very clearly HR's highest. Then actually it's legal. It's legal next, and and then marketing's just behind that, and then CFOs and COOs, and you'll see there are very few in the CIO role or the CEO role. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more about that. And you'll see the USA is pretty good. A lot more female techies in the US, which you can see from this, and Asia is pretty poor on tech. There are virtually none, and on CEO as well. So Asia is quite long. Europe and the US are quite sort of on par. And Asia is quite long behind on gender diversity. I've unfortunately got no data on ethnicity. It's quite interesting point to see. Then you look at the actual exco. The average exco in the FTSE 100 is 9 people. It's actually 9.12, and you tend to get the CEO. Then you tend to get what I call 5 staff officers, which are pretty much always finance, legal, HR, either a chief information or chief operations officer, and then either a chief marketing or a comms officer. Then you tend to get 3 product or divisional CEOs, if that makes sense. If you look at the digital giants, so the Amazons, the Metas of the world, and the Googles of the world, they tend to be a tiny bit bigger. They're like 9.5 ex-Coty, but the average still sits at 9, about 9. But what's interesting about the digital giants is they tend to have 6 staff officers and 2 line, if that makes sense. So 6 staff. So they've actually always got a chief marketing officer and chief technology officer. They got chief technology officer and a COO in the top team. So that's quite interesting. I put these going from left to right. I've also put these up in terms of the frequency of number. So it's also interesting to see in this is it's most frequently CFO, then legal, then HR, then COO. But what's interesting in digital giants is marketing is perceived to be more important than HR in the digital giants, whereas in the FTSE 100, HR directors are seems more important. The FTSE 100 is quite a good representation because 70% of the income of the FTSE 100 comes internationally. So although it's UK based, it's actually quite global representative. There's another really interesting thing here is in the FTSE 100, there's an interesting question. So are your divisions organized by geography? So do you have Europe, North America, Asia, or are they organized by product? So do you have HSBC retail, for example? And in the FTSE 100, it's pretty close to 50-50 which way they go. In the digital giants, they're 100% product. So there are no regional CEOs as part of the digital giant boards. They're all typically product-based CEOs. That does change a bit. So Amazon does have a North America one, but generally speaking, they're all product focused, and the FTSE 100 is a bit of 50-50 mix. And the reason I say that is because there's likely to be a trend to more product based. Okay, so that's the team we're trying to get you in. But there's a problem here. If you put C-suite into Wikipedia, you get about 85 roles coming up, and what we're now going to talk about is a 6-0 method. So this is what we're going to do. We look at 6-0 method, look at chief marketing officers, look at the shape of departments, look at smart power, and in the end we'll do a tiny bit on privilege. So first way is we see the world. We see everyone's been a chief expertise officer. So the expertise might be legal, it might be finance, could be marketing, could be data, could be anything. And that's what you learn. It's when Obama started out in life, he trained as a lawyer. And then after, you transfer to the law firm, then you start running teams as you get older. That's the chief bit coming in. So you start running teams and the teams get bigger and bigger. And then when you get more senior, you start adding value more across the organization. So the O starts kicking, you become a better company officer. So obviously, if you think about which comes first, your career actually runs ex-CO. Does that make sense? It's technical skill first, then running teams, then adding value across the organization. That's really, really important. And this is how it grows. This is the data behind that. So when you're in your 20s, you typically learn your technical skills. So you might be, so you mentioned marketing earlier. So your X goes from 0 to high pretty fast. And then you'll see that the C in your 30s, when you start running teams and things, C takes off and it goes on par with the X, but you're still learning technical skills. So you're not slowing down on technical, you're slowing down the amount, but you're still learning them. And the O starts to come off. But what's really interesting in your 40s, where the O overtakes all of them. So that's a really bit of interesting data, and the C and X come on par. And that's really interesting to know anything about careers. I'll tell you why that's interesting in careers in a moment. So career runs, very clearly, you can see your career runs XCO. The problem is when you're a board director or a CEO, the most important factor in selecting you into top team is O. It's your ability to add value across the organization. Then it's your ability to run teams, and then it's your technical expertise. And that's really interesting. And most people don't know that, because what happens to most people is they do really well their appraisals on technical skills, but they don't get invited into top team. They're thinking, why not? I'm brilliant at this. And the reason is it's not that relevant. You know, group general counsels don't do law. They run teams. They don't practice law at all. You know, group HR directors are running teams, adding value across the organization. They're putting processes, they're doing digital transformations. They're not doing HR. They're people who do HR for them. So it's really important to realize that when you're going to pitch yourself into these roles, your ability to add value across the organization is the absolutely overriding point. Then it's your ability to run teams, then your technical skill. And we're going to stay on that for a bit as well. Okay. So how many, if a person, how long do you think the average person lives for, is going to live for outside the Ukraine? Sorry. How long do you think the average person is going to live for born today in the West? What do you think?
68.
No, it's about 103. So life expectancy in the West is about 103. Japan is about 104. And that is game changing. And the reason why that's absolutely game changing, this is why it's important to think about your careers in a slightly different way, is and I have to one more caveat on this, that applies to office workers. If you're a postman or a soldier, you will die younger. So the wear and tear on your physical body will make you die younger. We also know that people who work nights, like nurses who work nights, they also die younger. So the way you live your life physically has an impact on how long your body sustains for. We know that. But if you're a standard office worker, behind a computer most of the time, like a lawyer, an accountant, or that kind of thing, you will tend to live to about 103 if you're born today. And the problem we've got is the average pension lasts for about 15, 20 years. And so you minus 20 years, say long stretch, 20 years from 103, that means you're retiring at 83. That means you're going to be in work for 60 years. That's a long old time. Long old time. So we need to think differently about our careers. This way it gets hold of. So what used to happen in societies across the globe, and some are more resistant than others, I'm not making judgments on that, is you tend to have a partnership of a man and a woman coming together, and typically historically the man built the tangible assets, which was money and that kind of thing, and the woman built the intangible assets, which was home and family. So that was the background behind it. But this has changed a lot in the West, and it's not nearly as relevant as it was, but certain cultures are more like that in art kind of thing. But actually, your career is 60 years, a family is going to be quite a short part of that. So this life, 100-year life, really changes the way we think. So there's a view, certainly in partnerships, that people would, one partner might take a break or go and do a PhD. So my wife's starting a PhD last week, for example, might take a break for 5 years. That's not a break, but do something else for 5 years and come back again. You could become, if your career is 60 years, you could be a lawyer for 20 and be really good at it, and then a doctor for 20, and then a surveyor for 20. You could have 3 full careers in that length of time. So it does quite change the way you think, and likely people will take proper life breaks in that chain of events. So it will change how we perceive life and our working careers. Can you guess what the average age of a CEO is? Average age of a CEO in Europe? Can you guess? Any guesses?
41, 37, 41.
31.
40, 41.
41, and this is a public company, okay? And how and can you guess what this, by the way, is public companies, and can you guess the average age of a C-suite executive? Do you think they're older or younger? So do you think the general counsel or the market director is older or younger than the CEO? And if so, by about averagely, how much do you reckon? Any guesses?
Older.
It's quite interesting. So the data, and this
I
is.
saw that Irina wanted to answer.
Oh, sorry, I
Irina,
can't
do
see
you
everyone.
want to answer regarding the age of CEO?
I thought it was about 50 for some reason. I don't know whether it is correct, but I thought about 50.
Okay. The answer actually is 55 in Europe. And then in the USA and Asia, it's a little bit older. What's really interesting is your executives tend to be 2 or 3 years younger. That's the thing, and that's important because when you think about it, if I want to be a chief legal officer of a big corporate, I need to be going into that team when I'm about 50 or my late 40s. That's when I should be sort of in a way going there. Now there are nuances in this. So if you're in the tech sector, they probably are 41 and younger. Whereas if you're in the insurance sector, they tend to be older. So there are sector nuances that go by. But the average across all corporates are shown in this table here. And I thought this was quite interesting because I always thought the techies, the CIOs, would be younger. But in fact, on average, they're the oldest in Asia and Europe and the USA than the other than their staff officers, which could be a bit of a surprise. Chief level officers, the youngest group tend to be marketing in the group. So I thought that was really interesting data to see. So now, well, that's also very interesting because it also means that we're going to post my, if I become a CEO, I'm 55, that's average age. So maybe I get to 65. I've still got 15 years of career left if I'm retiring at 80. Oh, so it changes the game a bit. So it's quite interesting to see how this is going to develop. And society is not planning for this. We're debating, France is having riots because they extended the pension age from 60 to 65, whatever the numbers are. But they should be extending it from 60 to 80. They're miles off what they should actually be doing. And all the insurance companies know this. So if you think about your career, then in your 20s you do your technical skill. In your 30s you learn your chiefs running teams. Your 40s you start to add value across the organization, start to join the top team. In your 50 you're in the top team. And then in your 60s, you have your post C-suite career, which might be an academic, could be a consultant, could be a non-exec director, and those kind of things. We'll come on to look at that. So that's why we sort of plan our careers. There are some base rules, and this is really tough. So if you're not on a public sector board by the age of 45, you will never be CEO. That's in the data. It's like 0.0001 people who's not on by 45 make it CEO. So that's quite interesting. And if you're not on PLC board by 55, you never will be. So you do have to get to these roles by a certain age level, which is quite interesting. There are stats because there are private equities that employ someone, then put them in on public companies. So there are exceptions, but this is very much the average data. So it's really interesting thinking of our careers, quite early on. So it's got to be 45 to get into the C-suite, or I'm never going to be CEO. I think it's quite an interesting stat to know about.
And how could it be? If you are not in the C-suite by 45? If the average age for CEO is more than 50?
So most of them will come in to the executive team before that. So they'll join the executive team and then they'll get promoted to CEO. There's a really interesting fact. We did some research on the FTSE 100 CEOs, and the problem you get in the media. So the media just highlights the CEOs who come from another company. Actually, the overwhelming majority of CEOs are homegrown, and not only are they homegrown, is they typically have. I think typically they've worked for the company before they're promoted to CEO. On average, they've worked for the same company for 9 years. So this idea that they get brought in from another company, it does happen. But actually, if you take 1,000 public companies, it's actually, we hear about it in 20 or 30, but that's actually a very small number in 1,000. And I guess that's how it's different. Okay, and I would want to look at what we call chief multidisciplinary officers, CMDOs, and this is quite interesting. So if you think about it, in Wikipedia, there are about 80, 90 C-suite roles, but if you rationalize that down to a sensible number, you get to about 45. So if you take CDO, you've got chief data, chief digital, chief diversity, chief design, chief development, and so on. And if you think about it, all those people have to report to these 5 staff officers. And say it's 45 around, that means each of these people have to have about 8 reports. And what that means by default, they are generalists. They cannot get in the top team as a specialist. You may, very occasionally, there's something the company's doing, do it, but on the whole, it doesn't come through. So in reality, if you look at what a chief multidisciplinary officer looks like, is you'll get it's like this. So a chief marketing officer actually does marketing, digital, comms, brand, external affairs, employee engagement, government relations. So actually, they should be called the CMD, CP, RBEA, but no one does that. They call them CMO. Likewise, the legal counsel probably covers COSEC, legal, risk, compliance, data, health, safety, regulatory affairs, investor relations, a whole bunch of stuff. So again, they should probably be called the CLR, CD, GEH, and so on. But we call them as chief legal officer for short. And there's something wrong with McKinsey's. McKinsey's have something called a T-shaped manager. This came out in the 60s. It's still talked about today. It doesn't work. And the reason McKinsey's T-shaped manager doesn't work is because it assumes one technical depth, and then that's the standard, the T. The cross bit is cross communications. That works until you get to top team, but when you get top team, that doesn't work anymore. So that McKinsey's theory, in a way, as you get more senior, becomes less and less relevant. So coming down. Now, this is really interesting because if you think about this, you really think about, of these skills, which are really important, which is important to the organization's future, if that makes sense. So let me give you some examples. Sorry about this, it comes in a bit weirdly. So at Volvo, the chief information security officer reports into the chief legal officer because the general counsel there went on the GDPR data security journey. At Dyson, the chief information security officer reports into the chief HR officer because actually 95% of information security breaches are human error, not technical error. Whereas at PA Consulting Group, the chief marketing officer, the CHRO reports into the chief marketing officer. Yeah. So it's quite interesting at how it works. So you need to think about how we play this sort of, in a way, musical chairs. And quite a lot of organizations will do what you call land grabs. So the chief financial officer at Standard Chartered Bank, I always remember turning around to me and said, I always make sure the strategy function reports to me, because the strategy function reports to me, then I control the future of the company. So you choose what reports to you when you go into those teams. You can influence it, which I think is really, really important. So the trick to remember in terms of the C-suite is breadth trumps depth. So breadth of knowledge becomes really important, which is why business schools work. MBA programs are good because you get that general breadth across the business becomes really, really important. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so the next thing is shape of departments. And what's really interesting about this, I'm not going to go into that, is we looked at the top knowledge areas for a middle manager versus a C-suite executive. So for a middle manager, the top 6 things that you need to know about are the vision, purpose, and values, people, talent, and performance, and the business model, clients, accounts, and cyber risk and ethics. Whereas if you look at the top team, the top one becomes the business model. Remember we talked about breadth, and that's the business model. And then the vision, purpose, and values stays up there, but also coming in from nowhere is stakeholders. So as you go up your career, you move from having to take client responsibility to stakeholder responsibility. And that's really important because actually in middle management, stakeholders don't feature at all. But as you get more senior, stakeholders become more and more important. Then you've got people, talent, and you've got governance. So 2 ones that come in there are stakeholders and governance, and they come from bottom of the list to top 6 when you go from manager to C-suite executive. So that's really, really important to remember. And likewise, you've got diversity, inclusion, and culture in there. Okay, so just with that in mind, this is how the knowledge increases. So this is actually looking at amount of knowledge. So you move from an executive to a manager. What you can see, then there's about a 20% uplift of knowledge between a C-suite manager, C-suite executive, and a manager. So there's a lot more knowledge you have to learn as part of the process. So I'm not going to linger on that, so we'll look at that for a moment. There's nothing going on in departments. This is really interesting. So we used to have in corporates, whether it's finance or HR or legal, we used to have triangle-shaped departments. You had your sort of group head, their divisional leads. And then in the middle, you had your project managers, your business managers, your senior legal counsel, your operations managers. And then underneath that, you had quite a large, process-driven organization, administrative, clerical roles. And what happened to the bottom bit is getting automated. It hasn't been automated already, it's in the process. And a lot of that got offshored originally, and now it actually has been reinsured digitally. You've also got a 10 to 40% reduction in the middle manager group, because the middle manager group, partly we're managing the other people, and you don't even doing that anymore, because then that number of people has decreased dramatically. So that's really interesting. So the functions are becoming smaller, which is really important headcount wise. So we have in our finance director group, we have someone that's going for, it's a big company, big company, really big company, going from 1,600 people to 105. Because you can automate finance, pretty much everything. You don't need a fees clerk, because you can create the invoice digitally, you can send it digitally, you can receive invoice digitally, that goes into your cash flow forecast, and you just don't need to touch it. I think you wire the money out from the bank digitally. You don't actually need to touch the invoice as it comes in. So you don't need to, and that has huge societal repercussions, but we won't, that's not the purpose of this course. So that's a journey you need to take functions on, and most functions will be already on that journey, if not done it but by now. So if your function gets smaller, that means you probably lose influence. Because you think about it, if I'm running a function, do I have the year of the CEO? If my function represents £1 million of cost, yeah, I might do. If it represents £250,000 of cost, oh, I have a little less time, a little less time. So size matters in terms of influence and power, and we're going to look at that in a moment. That's when most people judge you. If you wander around saying, what do you do? You say, I'm a marketing director. They say, how many people do you employ? It's actually the wrong question to ask, but they say, how many people are in your team? And that's where they judge how senior you might be. But actually, if you automated everything, you might have a very small team and deliver more value. So actually, it's the wrong question to ask. But well, stay on this for a moment. You also need to look at the shape of departments. So what you get of course, we found a lot of networks, you get mature departments and immature departments in terms of process maturity. So we in our general counsel group have a small group of 6 people who do legal operations, and they are way ahead of the rest of the world. Way ahead. They're like 10 years ahead of other functions. And that includes the likes of NBC Universal, EasyJet, and that kind of organization. So process maturity has a really big impact on how you run that part. And then the next big thing is the department centralized or decentralized? If that makes sense. So is my legal function or my function all sitting in one place, or are they spread all over the world? And do they report to me, or do they report to divisional heads? And am I an influencer, or am I a direct line report? And some people like running highly mature, centralized departments. That's what they like. And that's great. And that appeals to a certain character. Whereas some people like decentralized functions with low level maturity because they're transformation people, they're change drivers. So in a way, when you're looking at a role, you need to sort of ask the question, how centralized is the function? What does it look like? And how mature are the processes in it? If you're doing do you do panel reviews for your in-house counsel and those kind of things? So it's really useful to look at that in terms of shape departments. So shape departments are becoming diamond shape, and it's also maturity and centralized versus decentralized is a big 3 questions to find out when you're looking at these things. Any questions on that? Sorry, it's a lot. Okay, then you've got your stakeholders. So whether a marketing or finance function, part of my stakeholders are the internal department, people who report directly to me. Then externally, in a way, I've got the board. Internally, I've got the board and the exco who I report to, and I've also got the other departments and business units. So I obviously service business units, and I obviously service the other departments that exist. Then externally, might have a sector influencer, I might have a regulator, and I might have shareholders on the outside, but also might have suppliers or services on that. So that's my stakeholder management. These are the 5 things I need to think about. I've got the internal side, my own team, the internal staff, and the external staff. So when you look at your stakeholder management piece, that is the piece to consider when you look at those departments. Any questions on that so far? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about power. And power is really important. And come on to why I'll explain why power is important. It becomes really important. It comes down to the CEO role. And it's really interesting, this. So there are two types of power. There is hard power and soft. We talk in geopolitics, talk about hard and soft power. So military force, so the Russian invasion of the Ukraine was a hard power action. If that makes sense. And so the sanctions that went up against that is soft power. It is also hard power. It's economic. So money and military fights and payments are hard power. Soft power are things like culture, political values, government, and engagement. And really, in an organization, what you want to do is combine hard and soft power and create smart power. And to give you an example, I was a UN ops officer in Bosnia. This is General Michael Rose. We had a fantastic spy who was a lady. She got captured. And as you can imagine, when spies get captured, they have a pre-story. And the pre-story was she was the general's PA. And then the UN negotiation team goes in to try and get her out. And making the general's PA is a really clever way of doing it, because what they basically say is she's not important, but then the UN negotiation team says that Michael Rose, this general, adores her like his own daughter. And so what they're saying is she's not important to you at all, but the repercussions of this could be enormous. So that's a sort of soft power, hard power move of information, which meant the Serb general who captured her at the time handed her over without anything. So this is the mix on how it works. In a corporate, we have the same thing. So we have hard power is really direct positional power. So you have legitimate. So if someone reports to you, you have legitimate power over them. You can change their pay, or you can ask them, which is raw power, or you can coerce them to do something, which is also hard power. Indirect power includes things like referred power, which is things like, because you're also senior to me, and I'll do what you ask me to do. Information power is when you know something and you share it. And expert power is when you when you might be a lawyer or a doctor and people come to you for your expertise, kind of thing. Of these, the most transition of all these power types is information power, because actually once you've given the information, you lose the power. So it changes. So if you think about this, and now go back to our org chart, which has more longevity, do you think? Hard power or soft power? Which lasts for longer in life? Hard power or soft power? Any ideas?
Have very tricky questions.
The answer is soft power.
Yes.
So soft power, in the end, always wins. So soft power. Hard power, you can force people to do something for a period of time, but in the end, soft power always has longevity and wins. And the thing is that a functional head, like a general counsel or a finance director, actually have soft power. The divisional CEOs have hard power. Let me just explain why for a moment. So this is really important to realize, is that all these support roles, staff roles, are actually soft power roles. They exist to serve the operating parts of the business. And if you think about it, the CEO is a line power role. And all the CEOs are line power CEOs. Now, if I just reorganize that for a moment into another looking chart, it looks a bit like this. Because you think about it, each of those divisions is probably bigger than all the staff functions put together, which is really interesting. So these CEOs who run these are much more powerful than the staff officers by default, because they run entities which are economically much larger. And thing. So let me give you, and so running a career that has soft and hard power elements becomes really important. So you need to have staff experience and line experience. So Stephen Cooper is a really good example of this. So Stephen Cooper is now the CEO of Aldermore Bank, and he trained at Barclays Bank. And so at Barclays Bank, he was a retail banker. So he used to work in the Barclays High Street shop, and he was really good. So they promoted him, and he ended up running 3 shops and then multiple shops after that. And he's really good. And he offered him a big pay rise, I think it was about £20,000 to take another big step up. And he turned it down. He had a difficult conversation with his partner, but he turned it down to go and work in the strategy function. Because his view was, I'm really good at retail, and I understand deeply this part of Barclays, but I don't understand how Barclays works centrally. Which is a really interesting question to ask. So he comes from a line power role, and he's moving into SoftPack. Strategy sits in soft power. And so he does that for a bit of time, does it for about 4 years, and then he thinks, well, actually, Barclays is an international bank. I've got no international experience. So he goes and becomes a national CEO. And as part of that national CEO role, he has to deal with quite a lot of corruption that was existing there. And he actually shrank the business unit, but it gave him his international experience. And he now has run 2 other banks since leaving Barclays as CEO. And he said he wouldn't have been able to make that transition if he'd stayed in retail banking in Barclays, because he'd be too narrow in terms of his ability. So let's carry on that theme for a moment. This is a really interesting fact. 90% of CEOs come from line roles. See, I thought if you'd asked me beforehand where do CEO roles come from, I'd have said, well, they're finance directors, typically. That is not the case. 90% of them come from CEO roles. So 90% of people who are group CEOs come from divisional CEO roles. And divisional CEO roles come from probably head leads. And the problem we got in diversity is the line roles are much less diverse than the staff roles. And that's something that we need to work on quite a lot. And because what you'll find is your C-suite will look quite diverse, but actually the CEOs are all still certainly in the UK or white male. Oleg, you got a question?
Hello, sorry for joining late, and I'm
That's
joining
okay.
from US, so a bit in a different time zone, and I just wanted to share experience that I'm sure McKinsey is sharing this data on some selected statistics, but my experience is completely different in a way that first when I joined my company, and it is a public company, we did have a regional HR who was exactly sharing the same model, but that was experiential, not kind of management or fact-based, like the soft power he was experiencing on the regional HRs, and rather than the hard power. And he was working a lot on just enforcing his soft power skills. And because at that moment we were a decentralized organization. And then due to the change in management, the team did leave. So to your question, which lasts longer, as long as there are no tectonic changes, I mean, yeah, but they can both can stop pretty quickly. And the same for the management. We had a period when our senior management did change in a public company due to activists' action. And in fact, that was an internal placement. So probably I was getting in this 10% that where CEOs were getting from outside. But interesting that coincided, and wanted to share that experience. Thank you.
Okay. This is not outside roles. This is internal promotions.
Yeah, that's what I realized. But in my case, that was this 10%, which was outside role.
And 10% when you're talking about the number of companies we're talking about is still, if this is the S&P 500, this 10% is still 50. Still, so it's not say it doesn't happen, but the average is kind of how it sits. But thank you for that, because there are.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, please continue.
So, question, thought?
Okay, yeah, my question. Okay, my question is: do you have statistics? How many lawyers become CEOs of the company? Because usually CEOs become the company business divisions.
Yeah. So I know the CEO of Rentokil Initial in the UK, which is a big FTSE 60 company, is a former general counsel there. It is, and I think Schroders is, but it's quite rare. It's quite rare. And I'm going to come on to that because I got a really good case study on this. And
can you please then comment why do you think that it's rare?
Okay, yeah, I'll come on to that precisely. Okay, so I'll move on because I know your time runs out there. I've done that. So when you think about your career, the trick is to think about it's quite often you make a move, then you get promoted. So don't always think I need to get promoted all every time. You might make a move, then get promoted, then make a move, then get promoted. So it's a bit more like a a sort of a staircase than a ladder than a career ladder going straight up. And you might need to change organizations to do that. This is really just saying, your choices in career are very simple. You stay where you are in the same role, or you get promoted where you are, or you take the same role in another company, or you do both, which is a career change. For example, one of my marketing director members has just moved from UBS to Goldman Sachs. They're doing the same job. So that's a lateral move kind of thing. So those are the career choices. I'm going to go. But the trick to remember about lateral moves is every lateral move you make, you're collecting generalist points, and points make prizes. So it's good to do lateral moves. People think they're actually wasting time and putting their career back, and it's not the case. Quite often when you make a lateral move, you're actually preparing or gaining expertise you need in the future. I think I've got an HR. Okay, so yeah, this is quite an interesting thing. I looked at all the training for lawyers and accountants and techies and HR directors, and it's really interesting that lawyers and technologists, their degrees are typically 100% legal and 100% tech. Whereas if you go into finance or marketing degree, degrees are about 2/3 finance and about 1/3 general management. Same in marketing, 2/3, and HR pretty much the same, which means that finance, marketing, HR tend to all speak the same language, whereas techies and lawyers speak less of that language by default because they haven't trained that early. They pick it. They're smart. They pick it up fast, but it's a tech function is more likely to be siloed than a marketing function, because the people are less likely to have that breadth of understanding that they've learned as part of their early years. So the trick to go up your career is to create a strong brand and a broad level of expertise, and that starts at a very young age as you do it. Okay, now we'll talk about the CEO role. There's a quote by Peter Drucker that's very famous, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, which goes back to the earlier comment. There's also a quote I always think that purpose always trumps strategy. So this is really interesting. So the best quote which we wrote in terms of the role of the CEO is, the role of the CEO is to create, propose, and implement the strategy. That's their job. They create the strategy, they propose it to the board says yes or no, and then they implement it. They all do that. They do that to achieve the purpose. So that's their job. But the job is actually 90% implementation. It's actually an implementation role, which is why it's called executive. It's a chief executive officer, because their job is to execute the strategy. So when we bear that in mind, if you compare them to the C-suite, so in a way the C-suite, they become chief of the department, the CEO becomes chief of the top team, and they hold the keys. So if you don't get on with the chief exec, forget it. You're not going to get it. It doesn't work. So they hold the keys to who goes in that room. Their fundamental driver is the execution of strategy. So if you can do anything to help them execute strategy, you're aligning yourself to them, if that makes sense. That's a key part of what they do. And although your job as C-suite executive is to add value across the organization, their job is actually to represent the organization to the stakeholders and interested parties. So it's a slightly different role. So for them, the chief bit is about the top team, the X bit is about execution, the O bit is about representing the organization. It's a slightly different approach. This is my little case, though, which I think we come back to the general counsel point. So Natalie Prosser, she was a general counsel, and what she said, she said, I worked on massive merger and acquisition deals, the big deals. I was a really important person, gave really good advice. I was really, really good at this stuff. And then she said, I suddenly realized I never signed the documents. I don't own the deal. It's not me who decides whether we go ahead with it or not. I just, in a way, facilitate it happening and try and get the best deal, but I don't own it. And she suddenly realized that she didn't really own any business projects that worked internally. So she decided to, as a general counsel, to make a leap into a non-legal role. And she was pretty scared about it, because she said, I've never done it before. And she said, and it was weird. She said, suddenly I had, all my life I'd had lawyers reporting to me, and lawyers kind of think in a quite similar way. And suddenly I had marketing people and tech people, and said it was just weird. They just think completely differently. And actually I had completely changed my management style, because I suddenly got this breadth of different types of human beings reporting human beings. She thought that was really, really interesting. She said you have to keep on learning, and she said persistence beats resistance. And she's now CEO of the Office of Environmental Protection. One of the advice we give to our General Counsel group is regulators are a really good place to become CEO. So I advise them all to go into regulators, because if you think about it, if you go think about what does a regulator do in a sector, it's predominantly a legal function. It's a legal and law enforcement function. Therefore, actually being a GC there makes you actually you're very powerful in that thing. So the job from GC there to CEO is actually a much smaller job. Then the great thing about being a CEO of a regulator is when you step down as CEO, A, you're very well known in the sector, but B, it's also quite useful to have the CEO of the regulator on your board. So non-exec roles become quite easy. It's actually, for a lawyer, a regulator is actually quite an interesting route in your career to transition from General Counsel CEO to a plural non-exec group. We would recommend thinking about that kind of path. Now just a final bit on it. There's a bit about privilege. So if you look at diversity, if I look at ethnicity for a moment, the UK problem is quite different to the US problem in diversity. The UK problem is because of an historical class system. That makes sense, and it's still got the system, whereas the US problem is slightly differently. And let me give you an example of that. So there's a school in Knightsbridge, which had I think about 2-3 years ago had a parents' evening. They had a parents' evening every year, and they raise on the Knightsbridge school. The parents raise £1 million in an evening. That means their parent body have £1 million of disposable cash sitting in their bank accounts. That's a lot of money. You also got the problem you've got in the UK. Also, you've got the private system runs about a year ahead of state. So that means the kids are getting into better schools, learning a bit faster, and then getting into better universities. And that's being changed now. The universities are pushing back on that. But say they have an education privilege. Then there's a parent's view. Do parents talk about reality TV, or do they talk about business and economics and what's going on in society? That has an impact on how the child develops and how their brain develops. There's no question money helps. Money takes stress off people. If you're a university student and you've got to work at the bar at night, and because you have to pay for your rent, which most people do, that creates a bit of stress. If you don't have to do that, you have a little bit of stress, so money does help. Then there's an aspiration and confidence bit is people in certain parts of society are brought up to be, their assumption is you will do more senior jobs. You know, Eton, a school in the UK, has a day off every time they have a prime minister. And they have quite a few days off because of that. So these machines are built to deliver on this. And then this last bit I think is really important is about etiquette. People from all over the world in high society behave more similarly, if that makes sense. So it doesn't matter whether you're French, German, British, Polish. The societal behaviours will be similar as you go up and down through society. At West Point in the US, at Sandhurst in the UK, and at Sancerre in France, if you're made an officer, you're taught how to hold a knife and fork at a dining table. And that's quite interesting. So they regard etiquette as an important part of becoming an officer. And this is the same thing, the great advantage that privileged kids had. If you imagine the executive team, they behave in a different way. They become directors, they have laws that apply to them, they behave with each other in a slightly different way. The advantage privileged kids had is that their parents are probably in that group. And therefore they feel comfortable with that group. And so when you're looking out from that group, they feel more familiar. So in a way, they're a foreign country, but a privileged kid has been there and visited it. So it's much easier for them to go back and forth, go to it, if that makes sense. So how do we neutralize that? There are basically 3 ways of doing this. One is reach. You need to be visible. So Irena's a great example of this. Irena's very, very visible on LinkedIn and something. So you need to be visible, and that's important. You know, we have Kate here. Who recruits predominantly women, and ex-McKinsey is a brilliant woman, will turn around and says, you know, I get bored of women approaching me. He said, why didn't you put me up for this job? I haven't got your CV. How can I help you if I haven't got your CV? You know, don't give me a hard time. Send me your CV. Stop complaining. So you got to get out there and speak at conferences, sit on panels, that kind of thing. The next bit is range. you need to have a diverse group of friends. If all your friends are lawyers, it's not good. If all your friends are accountants, it's not good. If all your friends are fairs, good. You need someone who works in finance. You need someone who works in retail. You need a diverse group of friends from different backgrounds and that kind of thing, and working in different sectors, doing different jobs, because that will make you more interesting and more useful as a person. And the third and final bit is resilience. These jobs are really tough jobs, proper tough jobs. I mean, it's top. Their workload is enormous, and the attention to detail has to be really, really, really good the whole way through it. So you need, when times get tough, you need people you can fall back on, your friends, and you need to work out where you get your energy from. You get energy because you like music or you like running, but work out where you get energy from, and develop a core group of friends so you can fall back on when times are tough. If that makes sense. Yeah, so that's the key 3 things. Remember, your reach, make sure you're visible, make sure you have a diverse friends group, and make sure you have a robust friends group to fall back on. That's really it. Reach out in new sectors. You can go through, these are ways to network. It's through LinkedIn, it's through your business school alumni, search for connections everywhere, on a bus or an airplane. It's on a train, say hi to them. It's all that kind of thing. Ask them to mentor you is a good way of doing it. I find people who have a similar backgrounds to yourself, or similar interest to yourself, become really important as well. And buy them a coffee. Say, can I buy you a coffee? And that kind of thing. These are board advice to your children. I quite like this list. It's check your ambition. Make sure you actually really want to do this. Make sure it matches your own passions. You've got to be resilient. It'll be an early grave. CEOs, by the way, die young. Just a fact. CEOs die younger than other roles. So it's not actually, it shouldn't be the aspiration for everybody. Enjoy, don't endure. Don't do something because your parents did it. Stay current, keep moving. That's very important. And you have to get out there and don't wait for stuff to happen to you. You want to get promoted. Tell them you want the job. They can't tell unless you tell them. Always have an ear on customers. Understand deeply how the business works. And make sure you will make mistakes, but make sure you learn from the mistakes you go through, and always have an up-to-date CV. That's a really absolute key thing to have. So they're the top tips from boards to executives. So to wrap up, so I'm a long time. Your career runs XCO, but your selection is the top team is OCX. Remember that, really important. Remember, breadth trumps depth, really important. Remember to get sure your personal strategic fits with the organization you're going into or work in. Think about line and staff power experience. Think about lateral moves in the organization to different parts of the business because they give you C-suite points. And always try and align yourself to CEO, which is about executing strategy. And think about looking at yourself, think about reach, range, resilience, the 3 R's. That is it from me. I think I'm about time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know that you're running out of time, but still I have 2 questions and I would like to answer them shortly. In order just to save time, I will ask these questions at one go, and you just choose how you want them.
Yeah.
So first question, how to gain or how to develop soft skills, because we understand the technical skills. This is something that you can read, you can study, you can gain it from case study, but soft skills is something that you can't simply read in the books. I mean, you can, but then you need to know how to implement this. The second question is about refugees more. What recommendations can you give for those who start their careers from the beginning? These people usually don't have these 20 years that you explained at the beginning of the webinar. So when at 20 years you start, you're building your technical skills, then 30 years you do something more, then 40 years you're already prepared to be CEO, and so on. So people usually don't have these 20 years. So what recommendations you can give in order to people who have to start their careers from scratch? Thank you.
Okay. One of those questions is much easier to answer than the other one. So I say, how you develop skills. So I would read. I continuously read. I'm always reading business books. I continuously read. That's a good thing. Or do Audible, however you consume knowledge best. I would do sort of odd courses out of your area. So if you're a lawyer, do an online course in AI. or do an online, so I would do these courses. I would do things like TED Talks and that kind of thing are also very good. The other thing I would also do, which I think is kind of interesting, sometimes in business, they talk about things being a poison chalice, which is a project that no one wants to touch. And because it's failed multiple times. Sometimes it's worth volunteering for the poison chalice. And the reason it's worth volunteering for it is because everybody knows who you are when you volunteer for it, because no one wants it. So it immediately gives you internal profile. So it's a really good thing. And if you do get it to work, you're a superstar. But regardless, you're recognized, and you're recognized by someone who's prepared to take on stuff, even if it doesn't work. So I think the poison chalice can be a good thing for your career, if that makes sense, even if it doesn't work. So I think it is about learning, and it's also putting yourself out there. And one of the ways you could do that is become a charity trustee or become a school governor. In that sense, I think they could be good things to do. So if you're a refugee, you need to get into the system. That makes sense. So I would, so it's a really interesting question. So how do you get into the system? And, if you've got a technical skill, which is sort of partly valid, but not completely valid in a different country, how does that work, and how do you overcome that? So I would say you've got to be seen as someone who's got transferable, whose skills are transferable. So you might have to rework the language of what you do. But also you might find, if you're finding it difficult to start with, it might be worth looking at school governors or charity boards, because actually if you've got someone coming from, so take a Ukraine example, because I know that's where this is from. So if you come from the Ukraine, if someone applying for the company and they are they've got this background, but they haven't got any experience in the UK, that's quite a big jump to make for that organization. If they're a school governor already, you think, so actually they already understand how the system partly works. The other thing about joining these groups, like a governor or a charity trustee, is you get to meet other people who are trustees and governors, and you become their friends by default, and you help each other out. And so I would try and get into groups, and this sort of group is really good because it's also a Ukrainian group. But I would say you want to also get into non-Ukrainian groups, whether you're the only Ukrainian, if that makes sense. So get on a trustee board with the only Ukrainian or thing, because that makes you different and interesting, if that makes sense. So I think you need this group to come back to, because in a way that this is your safe space, and developed space, and you can learn from what your peers are doing. But I would try and jump into areas where your peers aren't doing it. I remember going to a dinner in Scotland once, and there were all these people have made millions around the table. I was very junior in the group, kind of made millions. And I asked one of them, say, how do you make your money? So I was in waste recycling. And I said, why do you go into waste recycling? And he said, because I'm not very bright. And I went, what do you mean you're not very bright? He said, well, I worked out that all my bright friends went into the city and became bankers. So I thought, if I become a banker, there's no way I'll be successful, because they're all better than me. But none of my mates went into waste recycling. So I thought, I'll go in there and there's no competition. so and he did really well. So I do think look for sectors where there's less competition, if that makes sense. Don't always go.
We're talking about network, right? We're back to that slide that you explained about built-in network.
Yeah, exactly. Which this can help too, because people here can help handhold you on the journey as you go forward. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you, John, so much. Dear participants, do you have any questions? I'm not sure that John has enough time, but still. Okay, no. John,
just one small question, if we have a minute. John, if you have any comments on lawyers pursuing MBAs and how they can capitalize on the MBA after graduation, and would they need to change role immediately, or if you have any observations on that?
Okay, so I think lawyers with an MBA is a very powerful thing. To have a lawyer with an MBA is a very powerful thing. If you do that, I wouldn't go back into legal initially. I would try and get a different role, an operational role, or a role that's quite different. Your MBA peers, 75% jobs are found through contacts. So MBA peers will be good for that. I would highly commend networking through this group. For me, the MBA, your peers in the MBA are quite similar to the way the trustees and governors I talk to. It's a new community you can tap into, but the quality of program is really is important. That helps with the brand, because the better the course you go on, the better your peers are, more likely they are to be able to help you find a job. One other thought: if you can't afford an MBA because it's spectacularly expensive and you don't earn money during that time, even just doing a short course can achieve much the same. So, you know, and it can be worth making that quite diverse. So rather than a short course, you know, I got degrees from 2 London universities. Probably don't want my next one to be from London University, because it just makes me a bit boring if it is. So maybe Singapore, something like that. You see what I mean? But yeah, I would highly commend business school.
Thank you very much.
John, thanks for this, for your time. Thanks for this interesting webinar. As I said, we made a record and I will post it to UBLN YouTube channel. I will also post a link to this record at UBLN LinkedIn page. Dear participants, thanks for joining this session, and I urge you to join our next session that is going to be about etiquette at interview and our lecture. And yeah, and our speakers will be the lecturers from Sheffield Hallam University. Yes, please follow the agenda, follow my information at LinkedIn, and join our sessions. Thank you so much for everything, and hope to see you again.
Thank you, and good luck to you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.